David.
Will the First Minister provide an update on Welsh Government coronavirus restrictions in South East Wales?
Thank the member Llywydd for that question. Restrictions in South East Wales continue to reflect the state of the public health challenge created by coronavirus. The Delta variant is now the dominant form across South East Wales. Prioritising the hard-won freedoms of recent months will be the task of the weeks ahead.
I've had a Facebook question from Rhian J, who raises the issue of the NHS vaccination app. And what she says is there any idea of when the Welsh NHS vaccination app will launch, please? I'm attending an event where I need proof of having had both vaccinations. Having raised it with the Health Board, they said that you can apply for a certificate in writing or by phone, and you can receive a certificate. But in England, you can receive the vaccination through the app. Rhian says that she rang this morning requesting this certificate, but it's her feeling that it's archaic and slow compared to the process in England. And her question is, when will we see the app in Wales? The Welsh Government has said that there would be roughly 4 weeks behind England before it's launched, but that's about now. So please can we have an update on that?
Thank you, Llywydd. Well, it is true that for technical reasons largely connected to the reconfiguration of the English solution to meet Welsh requirements, it was not possible to launch the app in Wales at the same time as it was launched in NHS England. I don't agree that the solution that has been in place in Wales in the last 4 weeks is archaic. Over 10,000 people have received certificates through that way of doing things, and it's due to the very hard work of the team in the Swansea Bay Health Board that that's been possible. Once the English system manages to do its job and to make access for Welsh people available to it, I'm afraid, Llywydd, it will not be available in Welsh, despite repeated requests to the UK Government to respect the law here in Wales. They tell us they won't be able to do that for several more months. But within the next few days, we do anticipate that it will be possible for Welsh citizens to use the same solution, albeit not via the app, but via a website portal. The journey thereafter will be identical to the app, and Welsh people will be able to use it in real time in the way that the English system has been available in England since the 17th of May.
Natasha Ashka.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, the latest figures for coronavirus in Wales reveal the stark contrast between case numbers in various parts of the country. Figures vary from 91.3 cases per 100,000 people in Conwy, 77.3 in Denbighshire and 73.7 in Flintshire, to only 6.6 in Merthyr Tydfil and 7.2 in Blaenau Gwent. In view of these regional disparities, can you, First Minister, please clarify your government's approach to local lockdowns, and is it still your policy to lift restrictions on an all-Wales basis?
Yes, Llywydd. It remains the policy of the Welsh Government that Welsh solutions that apply in all parts of Wales is the preferable way to dealing with the current state of the virus. The member is correct, however, to point to those regional disparities. It's now very clear that the north of Wales has been particularly exposed to the very large circulation of the virus in the northwest of England. Nevertheless, while we continue to learn more about the way in which the Delta variant is likely to spread and its impact on hospitalisations, we don't see the need currently to have a different level of restriction in any part of Wales.
Delith Jewell.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, the British Red Cross has found that loneliness is one of the most significant impacts of COVID-19 restrictions. Worryingly, their research also found that 37% of people in Wales wouldn't be confident in knowing where to go for mental health and emotional support. Could I ask what your government will do to address this, to ensure that health boards have capacity and the skills and the resources to meet the mental health and loneliness needs of their populations, and that everyone has access to advice and information? And finally, could I ask you if you will commit to increasing the rollout of social prescribing link workers? They can provide tailored support to people who are chronically lonely and to help them rebuild their confidence and independence. As we open society up, these people really need our support.
Llywydd Dilynwch is right that loneliness is regularly reported by populations across the United Kingdom as one of the impacts of coronavirus, not simply in the Red Cross survey, but in the fortnightly surveys that we participate in as a Welsh Government. And that isn't simply connected to mental health. Important as that is, it can simply be that people feel that those normal social interactions that they would be able to rely on at any other time have been much more difficult for them. Health boards are one of the ways in which we can respond to that, but we have relied a great deal on the third sector to provide those basic levels of connection with people, opportunities for people to have conversations with another human being, to link people sometimes to wider volunteer efforts in localities where people who have found this experience so difficult at that social level can be found new and different ways in which they can still have that level of human contact. And social prescribing, as the member says, is certainly an important part of the way in which future primary care services for people with those sort of low level, as it's sometimes called, mental health and well-being needs can be met in the community by facilitating access to that wider range of possibilities that already exist in the community, but where sometimes an introduction via a social prescription can break down the barriers that people can feel between their own needs and ways in which those could be met in the community. And a greater emphasis on social prescribing will certainly be part of the Welsh Government's response to the coronavirus impact in the months ahead.
Cwestiwn 2, Paul Davies.
Pa gamau mae Llywodraeth Cymru yn ei cymryd i gefnogi'r economi ym Mhrysseli sy'r Benfro?
Diolch yn fawr i Paul Davies am y cwestiwn. Llawydd ymdrin yn effeithiol a bygythiad y coronavirus yw'r prif ffordd rydym yn cefnogi'r economi ym Mhrysseli sy'r Benfro o hyd. Bydd hynny'n galluogi busnesau yn yr etholaeth i fenteisio ar y holl fuddsoddiadau eraill a mae Lywodraeth hon yn ei gwneud i ddiogelu a'i dyfodol.
Prif Weinidog, o gofio bod cyfyngiadau yn parhau, mae'n bwysig eich bod chi fel Llywodraeth yn gwneud popeth o fewn eich gallu i gefnogi ein busnesau wrth symud ymlaen ac i gefnogi economïau lleol. Nawr, mae busnesau teithio yn fy etholaeth i wedi cysylltu â fi oherwydd maen nhw'n dal i gael trafferth gyda'r effaith y pandemig ar ei gallu i wneud busnes, wrth gwrs. Dywedodd un busnes wrtho fi a dwi'n dyfynnu, mae angen cymorth ariannol arno mae'n helpu drwodd i'r cyfnod nesaf. Mewn gwirionedd, rydym wedi cael zero incwm am y 15 mis diwethaf. Mae'n sefyllfa amhosib ac anghynyliadwy ac mae'n bryd ar lefel ranbarthol a cenedlaethol i'r diwydiant teithio dderbyn pecyn cymorth pwyllog penodol. Prif Weinidog, beth yw eich neges chi i'r busnes hwn ac yn wir i fusnesau teithio ar ledled Cymru ac am wnewch chi ymrwymo i ddarparu cefnogaeth i'r sector mwyn amddiffyn cynaliadwyedd y sector ar gyfer y dyfodol?
Wel, diolch yn fawr i Paul Davies am y cwestiwn, a dwi'n cytuno. Mae'r argyfwng coronavirus wedi cael effaith mawr ar busnesau fach yn y maes teithio, a mae hwnna'n mynd i parhau am misoedd sydd i ddod. So, oedd gweinidog dros yr economi wedi cyhoeddi pecyn help ychwanegol i busnesau sydd wedi weld yr effaith o'r ffaith that ni ddim yn gallu bwrw ymlaen i ail agor pethau fel oeddwn ni'n bwriadu wneud yn reiddiol, a mae e'n dal i gweithio gyda'r swyddogion i paratoi am fwy o gymorth i busnesau fel busnesau yn y maes teithio sydd ddim yn gallu ail-agor o gwbl neu sydd ddim yn gallu ailagor yn llawn. Ac mae gwaith yna am parhau, a bydd y gweinidog yn mynd i ddod i'r llawr Senedd i esbonio sut ni'n mynd i bwrw ymlaen i helpu i roi fwy o gymorth i'r busnesau fel busnesau teithio, fel mae Paul Davies wedi awgrymu brynhawn yma.
Joyce Watson.
Paul Davies will know that businesses in Wales have received £400 million more in coronavirus support than they would have done had those same businesses been in England. That is what the Welsh Government has done to support the economy, both in Preseli, Pembrokeshire, but right across Wales. But looking ahead, First Minister, I know that you talked about this in some detail last week, but will you make sure that any consultation on a proposed tourism levy will take on board the views of local ratepayers in our tourist hotspots, as well as the brilliant businesses that serve those visitors, because they're the ones who bear the brunt of council budget constraints that pay for things like the toilets, rubbish collection and car parks. And I think it's only fair that they should be able to ask those who can afford to holiday in our beautiful region to pay just a little extra.
Well, Llywydd, I thank Joyce Watson for both of those important points. And she is right, of course, that an enormous amount of help has already been provided to businesses here in Wales. In Pembrokeshire alone, nearly 7,000 grants have been paid out at many millions of pounds to go on supporting those companies and those businesses as we are committed to doing. When it comes to the tourism levy, Llywydd, as I explained last week, the discussion we intend to have is one about a local power for local authorities to raise a levy where they choose to do so and think that will be right for their local circumstances. Where Joyce Watson is undoubtedly true is that the idea is a popular one amongst those indigenous populations who currently have to bear the full costs of all the services that are provided in their areas, even when those populations rise very considerably during a holiday season. And the purpose of a levy, were there to be a local authority that wished to use it, in my mind, is to make sure that visitors make a small contribution to the investment that is needed to keep the places that they visit thriving and to have all those facilities, the car parks, the toilets, everything else. But if you visit somewhere, you hope to find making a small contribution to it seems to me to be an investment in the future success of those businesses and of those localities, and to do it in a way that is fair, where the costs involved are shared between people who live there permanently and people who are making a visit to those fantastic places we have here in Wales.
Cwestiynau nawr gan arweinwyr pleidiau, arweinydd yr wrthblaid, Andrew Davies.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, yesterday I visited Tŷ Hafan in the Vale of Glamorgan, a wonderful facility that provides so much care and compassion for children with life-limiting conditions and their families as well. Tŷ Gobaith obviously does the same in North Wales. Do you recognise, as it's National Children's Hospice Week, the difference between a children's hospice and an adult hospice and the level of funding that would be required for the hospice movement here in Wales?
Well, Llywydd, I too have had the privilege, and it is a privilege in the past, to visit both Tŷ Hafan and Tŷ Gobaith, and to see for myself the astonishing work they do and the commitment of the people who work there. The formula that we use to provide the help that we do to the hospice sector in Wales is a formula that was put in place through the work of Baroness Elora Finlay in her discussions with the sector. We keep that under review with the sector and talk to them all the time. But it is not a Welsh Government formula that we devise and we impose. It's a formula that we derive through the discussions with the sector and the many needs which it seeks to fulfil.
Do you recognise, First Minister, that regrettably in Wales that formula only delivers 5% of funding to children's hospitals, whereas opposed to in England it's 21% of funding and in Scotland it's 50% of funding? Now, I'm not for a moment saying that the Welsh Government should step in and jump straight to 50%, but do you believe that there's a journey required to level up that funding stream, especially coming out of COVID and the devastating impact that's had on fundraising activities for charities? Because it cannot be equitable that such a formula delivers such an imbalance in funding for children's hospitals here in Wales at 5%, 21% in England and 50% in Scotland. So will you commit the government to reviewing this formula so that a more equitable formula can be put in place to support the compassionate work that hospices in the children's sector do here in Wales?
Well, I certainly agree with Andrew Davies Llywyd about the important work that the third sector has carried out in Wales during the pandemic and has been strongly supported by a specific fund that the Welsh Government has made available and which has been put to very good use by the third sector in responding to a whole range of needs, the loneliness needs that we heard earlier this afternoon, and in the work that it does in the hospice movement as well. The comparison that the Leader of the Opposition draws is not a like-for-like one, because it doesn't take into account the other forms of support that are available in Wales that are not necessarily available elsewhere. But we remain in a constant dialogue with the sector about both the quantum of money that we are able to provide to it and the way that it is dispersed. It's a fiercely and quite properly voluntary sector, isn't it? You know, it absolutely wants to make sure that it goes on doing all the things that it does to raise its own funds, to draw on the generosity of people in Wales, and agreeing a way of making sure the money that we are able to provide arrives in the right place, arrives in a way that recognises the significant differences between the different sorts of services, the different types of hospice charities provide in Wales, is quite a complex one. It's why we were reliant on the excellent work that Baroness Finlay carried out in her discussions with the sector, and we continue to try and move forward with the sector in partnership in that way.
Regrettably, I didn't hear a commitment to have a review of that funding formula, although I do accept it's a complex area, and I do accept the point that you make, First Minister, about the fierceness with which the sector protects its charitable status, and rightly so, because the money it raises. But if I could raise a separate matter with you, and that's around the football that's due to take place in the last 16 of the UEFA Championships on Saturday. Yesterday, the Health Minister, in my mind, rightly pointed out the restrictions that have been put on international travel for fans to go over to Amsterdam. However, this morning, the Danish government have come out and said their fans will be able to travel to Denmark, to Holland, to Amsterdam, to watch their team play, providing it's within a 12-hour window. Now, very often, fans in the stadium are classed as the 12th man, helping their team on to victory, hopefully, as we all wish next Saturday. Given the change in circumstances for Danish fans, and as I understand it, the level of infection is the same in Denmark as it is here in Wales, will you be making any representations to the Dutch authorities to allow Welsh fans to travel, should they meet the travel requirements that are placed on travelling fans to watch in tournament matches? Because I do believe that the ground has now moved, given that both teams were on the same field yesterday when it came to fans' restrictions. But today, the Danish government have moved to allow their fans to travel within a 12-hour window for Saturday's match.
So we will, first of all, of course, to congratulate the Welsh team on proceeding to the knockout parts of the tournament, and to wish them every success on Saturday when they face Denmark in Holland. The advice of the Welsh Government has not changed, Llywydd. It's the same advice that the Football Association of Wales and indeed the Foreign and Commonwealth Office have given to fans, that this is not the year to travel to watch Wales play abroad. And I'm hugely grateful to those thousands of people who would dearly have loved to have been able to travel and to have gone to support the Welsh team elsewhere, who have followed the advice that they have been given, which is that they are safer and the people that they care about are safer if they choose to stay in Wales and to support the team from here. We've seen, even in the last 24 hours, that there are players who have fallen ill as a result of coronavirus and won't be able to take part in the next stage of the tournament. And while we are in the position that we are in Wales, with the Delta variant rising and the vulnerabilities that cause us, the advice of the Welsh Government has not changed. It remains aligned with the advice that comes from elsewhere. Our advice is don't travel, enjoy the tournament, support your team from Wales.
Rhan Plaid Cymru, Rhyn ap Iorwerth.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Llywydd Prif Weinidog, rhyw flwyddyn yn ôl mi oeddech chi yn cyhoeddi bod ysgolion am gael ailagor eto ar ôl cyfnod clo hirfaith, ond da ni'n gwybod wrth gwrs gymaint mae teimlo'n ynysig bod ar wahân o'i ffrindiau wedi cael effaith drom ar lesiant a iechyd meddwl pobl ifanc. Rwan drwy gydol y pandemig, di'r gyfran o bobl ifanc sy'n aros dros 4 wythnos am apwyntiad ar ôl cael referral i dîm cams arbenigol erioed wedi disgyn dan chwarter. Ydy hynny'n ddigon da?
Wel, i ddechrau, dwi'n cydnabod wrth cwrs ar effaith mae coronavirus wedi cael ar iechyd meddwl a lles bobl ifanc bob tro dwi'n cwrdd gyda'r bobl ifanc trwy'r Senedd Ieuenctid. Enghraifft, bydd hwnna'n rhywbeth mae nhw'n codi bob tro ni'n siarad da nhw. Ar y cyfan, dydyn nhw ddim yn siarad am gwasanaethau arbennig fel cams. Mae nhw'n siarad am pethau mae nhw'n eisiau weld yn yr ysgol, yn y gymuned, pethau mae nhw'n gallu cael yn gyflym a cael pan mae nhw'n trial i delio gyda'r problemau bob dydd o tyfu lan mewn cyfnod mor ansicr. Gyda'r cams, wrth gwrs, mae nhw fel pob adran arall yn y maes iechyd yn trial i ymdopi gyda'r effaith coronavirus arno nhw. Hefyd, dydyn nhw ddim yn gallu weld pobl mewn yr unig ffordd oedd nhw'n gallu cyn y coronavirus, a mae nhw'n gweithio'n galed i trial i fod yn hyblyg, i trial yn fod yn creadigol, i ffindio'r ffordd i roi yr cymorth arbennig i'r bobl ifanc sy'n cwbl mor dost. Mae'n rhaid iddyn nhw cael gwasanaeth arbennig fel na.
Mae wrth gwrs straen ar wasanaeth arbenigol cams yn ystod y pandemig, ond nid problem newydd ydy hon. Mae ffigurau sy'n newydd gael eu cyhoeddi yn dangos yn mis Awst 2019 bod bron hanner yr rheini oedd yn cael referral ar gyfer gwasanaethau arbenigol cams yn aros dros 4 wythnos. Dwi'n meddwl yng Nghaerdydd ar Fro, mi oedd yn 85%. Ond lle mae'r ymateb i hynny? Da ni yn gweld cynnydd a chyflymu yn y broses frechu rwan, mae'n ymateb i'r amrywiolyn Delta. Da ni'n gweld rhaglenni dal i fyny yn cael eu cyflwyno mewn addysg, ond pan mae'n dod at broblemau iechyd meddwl dwys, dydw i ddim yn gweld yr un difrifoldeb. Rwan, fel gweinidog iechyd nôl yn 2015, mi ddwedsoch chi i bod hi yn bwysig bod y bobl iawn yn cael eu trin ar yr amser iawn. Ond pan mae'n dod at iechyd meddwl pobl ifanc, nad ydy hynny'n digwydd hyd yn oed rwan 6 mlynedd yn ddiweddarach?
Well, I do think Llywydd, the member doesn't give proper credit to the advances that were made in the CAMS service in the 2 years prior to the onset of the coronavirus pandemic, because the figures did improve, and they improved significantly across Wales, and the service was on a path of real improvement. Now, I've answered many questions on the floor of the Senedd from the time I was Health Minister, and it's always been my view that what you need for young people are a range of services so that not everybody ends up being referred to the CAMS service as the first step in getting help with a mental health issue. Part of the problem of the CAMS service has been that a very large number of people who are referred to it turn out not to be suitable candidates for that service. All of those young people have got to be assessed. All of those young people then get into the queue in front of other people for whom that service genuinely is the response that is necessary. What we have to do is to draw the people who are referred to CAMS when they should and could be very properly provided for by a school counselling service, sometimes even by people who are equipped with first aid, mental health knowledge and understanding in universal services like the youth service, to be able to help those young people who need help of that sort. The help, as I said, Llywydd, that when you talk to young people themselves, that is the help that they most often raise with you. Things that are easily available, close to hand, part of the normal run of things with which they are engaged. And then the people who need a CAMS service will be able to get to that service more quickly. The service was well on that journey. It is inevitably disrupted by coronavirus. And as I said, the service is working very hard to try and find creative ways in which it can go on providing a timely service for those young people who need it, despite the limitations on the extent to which they are able to do that in more conventional face-to-face ways.
And of course we need to refer people to the right kind of support, but we can't play down the importance of specialist CAMS services either. And there was an increase in referrals in the first 4 months of this year compared to last year. But the Sened's Children, Young People and Education Committee did a lot of work on the impact of the pandemic and in particular highlighted this problem of the missing middle, the significant number of children and young people who need mental health advice and support, but who may not need acute or specialist services. So I agree with the First Minister in that. You'll know that Plaid Cymru has put forward proposals for a network of walk-in centres across Wales offering free and confidential mental health advice and support for young people. Now, First Minister, do you agree that such a network really could now, in particular after the pandemic, perhaps offer a lifeline to the thousands of young people currently caught in that missing middle? And if so, would you and your officials meet with me to discuss pursuing that proposal further?
Well, Llywydd, I'm glad to hear that referrals have recovered, and that's good news, and it's part of the general recovery of referrals to health services in Wales in the first months of this year compared to the immediate post-crisis period in March and April of last year. Of course, I am very happy to arrange a meeting to talk about whether that idea would be a contribution to the range of services that we currently provide. There are walk-in services for young people already in a number of different ways, some through the third sector, some through the counselling service that we have in schools. So we would need to be confident that we were not duplicating something that was already there or undermining a service that was already succeeding in providing help to young people. But to explore the idea and to see what might be made of it, then of course, I'm very happy to make sure that such a meeting is arranged.
Question 3, Janet Finch-Saunders.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the introduction of a deposit return scheme for drink containers in Wales?
I thank the member for that question, Llywydd. The Welsh Government is committed to bringing forward a deposit return scheme for drink containers, and our preferred model was set out in the recent consultation. Alongside the work to review the consultation responses, a trial is currently underway in Conwy to pilot the digital delivery of a deposit return scheme.
Thank you. You'll be aware that last November I brought forward a legislative proposal for a bill that would make provisions to introduce a deposit return scheme and to reduce waste in Wales. And a majority of 34 members backed my proposal. Now, whilst you abstained, the vote did go in favour of this legislative proposal. And as you can imagine, I'm really keen to ensure that we do not lose that momentum gained, especially at the start of a new and, being the 6th then of term. I was therefore somewhat disappointed, First Minister, that for such a worthwhile and proven piece of legislation forthcoming, there is no clear commitment in your programme for government introduced last week to develop a DRS. You quite rightly mentioned that Conwy County Borough Council is working with Welsh Government, Polytag Limited and RAP to trial the new DRS. The intervention is for interviews with residents and recycling crews after the trial to provide more information on how the scheme could be used across Wales. So should the trial go well in Conway, as in the Wirral, where 91% of tagged packaging was successfully recycled, by when would you expect to have an all-Wales DRS in place which is aligned to and interoperable with other systems across the UK? Thank you. Diolch.
Well, thank the member very much for that question and for highlighting the pilot that is going on in around 500 homes in her own constituency, which is going to make a genuine contribution to our understanding of how a DRS scheme could be taken forward. Ministers always abstain, Llywydd, on backbench legislation. That's the convention that we have. But I'm pleased to be able to say to the member that we hope to secure powers for a deposit return scheme for Wales through the UK Environment Bill. The latest information we have is that that is expected to complete its parliamentary passage in time to get royal assent in the autumn. We will then have the powers we need to bring forward our regulations, and we expect to lay those in the autumn as well.
Mike Hedges.
Llywydd. Can I welcome the response given by the First Minister? I think it's something very many people across the chamber are very much in favour of. On Friday, I met with pupils from Glencochran School online who were unanimously in favour of a deposit return scheme. And I told them about the old Corona Pop, the scheme which I mentioned fairly regularly here. Does the First Minister agree that Welsh Government doing it is a very massively positive, but an all UK programme would be much better? It would make it easier for firms to ensure that they can be bought in Chester and taken back in Wrexham. So that make it much easier for the scheme to work. So yes, I think we all would like a Welsh scheme, but an all Britain scheme would be so much better.
Well, so I thank Mark Hedges for that, and the tradition in Glencochran School of campaigning on these matters is a very real one. Now, I remember a question on the floor of the Senedd here about the work that pupils in the school were doing to make sure that milk was supplied to the school in reusable format rather than in cartons that were thrown away. So many congratulations for their continued interest in it. Had they been brought up in Carmarthen rather than Swansea, Llywydd, they would have been drinking Tavali Special rather than Corona Pop. But the general point that Mike Hedges raised, and I think it was an echo of something that Janet Finch-Saunders said, is that we would like to see a UK scheme because we think that that will work better for people here in Wales. Easier for consumers, of course, a long and porous border, people shopping and living on both sides of it, an influx of people into Wales during the summer months. Particularly, we want people to have a single system that they can easily understand. There is a fraud possibility if you have different systems on either side of the border, and a single system would help to eliminate that, and it would have lower implementation costs for businesses as well. For all of those reasons, we hope that the UK Government, who, a bit to our surprise, and slightly at the last minute, put into their consultation, instead of the all-in scheme that we would like to see, an on-the-go scheme. Now, Scotland already committed to an all-in scheme. That is definitely our preference. We hope the UK Government will settle for that as well, as we originally believed would be the case, and then we will be able to have the UK-wide arrangements, which Mike Hedges, I think, quite rightly advocates.
Question 4, Sam Rowlands.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the Welsh Government's economic priorities for North Wales?
Diolch, Llywydd. Our economic priorities for all parts of Wales, including those, of course, for North Wales, are as set out in our newly published programme for government.
Thank you for your response, First Minister. You will know that one of the biggest employers in North Wales is the tourism sector, which supports around 46,000 jobs and in usual times generates over £3.5 billion annually to the local economy. However, as you touched on earlier, we're aware of your plans to explore a tourism tax on visitors holidaying in Wales. The Wales Tourism Alliance has said that this would make the industry less competitive and make Wales seem more expensive. So would you agree with me that rather than time, energy and resources are spent in seeking to introduce a tax which has been rejected by the experts in the field, now should be the time to further support the sector to bounce back from the pandemic?
So now is the time for the government that was elected by the people of Wales to fulfil the manifesto on which we were elected. The proposal to explore a tourism tax was absolutely and explicitly there in our manifesto and discussed during the election campaign. The people of Wales made their decision and they will get the party that they voted for and the proposals that we put in front of them.
Ken Skates.
First Minister, the hard work of successive Labour governments has led to the employment rate in North Wales reaching a record high, and we now have a record number of businesses in existence in North Wales. And of course, cross-border collaboration has been instrumental in driving the success story of the North Wales economy, and there are particularly strong ties in key sectors such as green energy and advanced manufacturing and indeed life sciences. First Minister, would you agree with me that working together with our cross-border comrades makes us stronger, and it is absolutely necessary in order to avoid competition and to enhance cross-border transportation too?
So I thank Ken Skates for that and for drawing attention to the strengths of the economy in North Wales with its record high levels of employment, with, as members will have seen, the direct inward investment figures published today showing the ongoing strength of the economy in that part of Wales. And I was very pleased recently to meet with very senior members of the board of Airbus who came to tell me of their plans to go on investing in North Wales as that aviation sector recovers, and how determined they are that the very skilled and committed workforce they have in that part of Wales will go on being part of that global company's future. Now, the member himself, Llywydd, when he was the Minister for the Economy, was a great champion of working with others to make sure that the economy in the north east of Wales, particularly, is part of that wider ecology and economy. The Mersey-D Alliance that I know he championed, and our colleague Vaughan Gethin has attended a meeting today of a launch of a series of ideas for an economic and fiscal stimulus across the Mersey-D area, the Offshore Energy Alliance, the possibilities for a cross-border carbon capture and storage economy in the hydrogen field, where we have investments in Ynys Môn and in Flintshire, and I know that this was an area where the member particularly championed things, a metro programme in which we persuade the UK government to make the necessary investments they have to make in the road and the rail infrastructure to make sure that the economy of North Wales can go on thriving.
Cwestiwn 5, Luke Fletcher.
Diolch Llywydd. Sut mae Llywodraeth Cymru yn sicrhau hawl pob plentyn i gael mynediad at addysg cyfrwng Cymraeg yng Nghymru?
Diolch am y cwestiwn, Llywydd. Mae pob awdurdod lleol yng Nghymru yn darparu addysg gyfrwng Cymraeg, ond mae gosod y sylfaeni i ehangu mynediad at addysg Cymraeg yn ymgyrch tymor hir. Rydyn ni'n torri'r tir newydd gyda'r cynlluniau strategol y Gymraeg mewn addysg 10 mlynedd, ac rwy'n edrych ymlaen at weld ffrwyth a llafur hynny.
Diolch am yr ateb Prif Weinidog. Allai dynnu sylw'r Prif Weinidog at Sir Pen-y-bont ar ogwr am eiliad. Mae sawl teulu ym Mhrefen enedigol o Bencoed bellach o bosib yn wynebu sefyllfa lle na fyddent yn gallu anfon eu plant i'r ysgol gynradd Gymraeg agosa, ac yn lle bydd angen iddynt ddewis rhwng anfon eu plant hyd yn oed ymhellach i ffwrdd i dderbyn eu addysg neu ddewis addysg Saesneg. Yn anffodus, nid yw record cyngor Sir Pen-y-bont ar addysg iaith Gymraeg yn un positif. Mae'r cyngor wedi methu dros y blynyddoedd diwetha i sicrhau bod addysg Gymraeg yn opsiwn realistig mewn nifer o gymunedau, ac mae nifer mawr o deuluoedd wedi cael ei gorfodi i wneud penderfyniadau am addysg eu plant nad oeddent am ei wneud. Pa waith y bydd y Llywodraeth Cymru yn ei wneud gyda cyngor Pen-y-bont i newid y sefyllfa yn sylweddol? Os yw'r Llywodraeth o ddifri o ran cyrraedd ei tharged o filiwn, yna bydd angen i'r Llywodraeth gymryd y sefyllfa mewn ardaloedd fel Pen-y-bont o ddifri.
Wel, diolch am y cwestiwn. Dwi'n ymwybodol am y pwyntiau mae'r aelod wedi codi, achos dwi wedi cael cyfle i siarad yn barod gyda'r aelod lleol am Pen-y-bont ac am dyfodol addysg trwy gyfrwng y Gymraeg yn yr ardal na. Ym mhob gŵr o Gymru, mae bob aelod fan hyn siŵr o fod yn cynrychioli bobl pan maen nhw ddim yn gallu cael lle yn yr ysgol maen nhw'n ddewis. Dwi'n wneud fel aelod yn gorllewin Caerdydd bron bob blwyddyn gyda'r plant sy'n eisiau addysg drwy gyfrwng y Saesneg yn y ddinas. Ni gyd yn gwneud gwaith gyda'r unigolion fel yna. Ni yn wedi bod yn gweithio'n galed ac yn agos gyda'r cyngor Pen-y-bont ar ogwr i tyfu y nifer o'r lle sydd da nhw yn ysgolion yn yr ardal trwy gyfrwng y iaith Gymraeg. A mae cynlluniau da nhw nawr sy'n mynd i tyfu y nifer o bobl sy'n gallu mynd i fewn i'r ysgolion Gymraeg dros y degawd nesaf, pethau ymarferol, fel maen nhw'n eisiau gwneud fwy yn ysgol y ferch o'r Segeir, maen nhw'n mynd i symud ysgol i'r ganol Pen-y-bont i tynnu fwy o bobl i fewn fel na, maen nhw'n mynd i ail creu ysgol Bro Ogwr a roi fwy o lle yn yr ysgol. Hynny, mae fwy o gwaith i wneud ym Pen-y-bont. Dwi'n ymwybodol am hynny, ond dwi'n siŵr mae'r cyngor nawr gyda'r y cynlluniau a gyda'r yr arian ni'n roi fel Llywodraeth i helpu nhw. Maen nhw'n ar y ffordd ymlaen i helpu ni gyd i gyrraedd at y pwynt hanner ffordd trwy'r ganrif ble bydd miliwn o siaradwyr o Gymraeg yma.
Samuel Kurtz.
Diolch, Llywydd. Mae carfan amrywiol o llywodraethwyr ysgol o amrywiaeth o gefndiroedd yn allweddol i redeg a reoli ysgol yn effeithiol. Daw llawer o ddisgyblion sy'n mynychu cyflesterau addysyddol cyfrwng Cymraeg o gartrefu lle nad yw'r rieni'n siarad Cymraeg eu hunan. Pa gymorth y mae Llywodraeth Cymru yn ei gynnig i sicrhau bod rieni di-Cymraeg yn cael eu hannog i sefyll etholiad fel y riant lywodraethwyr mewn ysgolion cyfrwng Cymraeg?
Wel, dwi'n gwybod, wrth gwrs, llywydd dros Gymru i gyd. Mae nifer fawr o plant sy'n dod o'r teulu di-Gymraeg yn mynd lan am addysg drwy gyfrwng y Gymraeg, yn dwi'n croesawu. Hwna mae'n rhan bwysig o'r cynlluniau sydd da ni, ac yma yng Nghaerdydd, mae 8 o'r 10 o blant sy'n dod ymlaen i addysg drwy gyfrwng y Gymraeg yn dod o teulu ble does neb arall yn siarad Gymraeg. Ac mae'r ysgolion yn gweithio'n galed gyda'r adnoddau. Ni wedi helpu i paratoi i helpu bobl sydd ddim yn gallu siarad Cymraeg, sy'n eisiau fod rhan o'r ysgol ar y bwrdd Llywodraethwyr, enghraifft, i wneud hynny mewn ffordd effeithiol, a maen nhw wedi llwyddo i wneud e. So mae enghreifftiau da ni'n barod am sut i wneud e, ac trwy cydweithio gyda'r awdurdodau lleol, ac i ddysgu o'r profiadau sydd wedi gweithio dros Gymru. Dwi'n hyderus allwn ni ffindio'r ffordd i bobl sydd eisiau bod rhan o'r bywyd yr ysgol yn gallu wneud hwnna ac yn gallu wneud cyfraniad effeithiol hefyd.
Yw'r Davies.
Diolch, Llywydd. A fydda'r Prif Weinidog yn cytuno â mi bod yn rhaid i ni fuddsoddi mewn addysg Cymraeg a gofal plant Cymraeg fel rhan o'n hichelgais i greu miliwn o siaradwyr Cymraeg. Felly, a fyddai'n ymuno â mi groesawu'r gwaith sydd wedi dechrau wrth ailadau canolfan newydd gofal plant Cymraeg a Melyn Ifan Ddu yn Nwmogmor, fel rhan o'r uchelgais cyngor Pen y Bont yr Ogwr i gryfhau addysg a gofal plant Cymraeg yn yr ardal.
Wel, diolch yn fawr i yw'r Davies Llywydd, a dwi'n cytuno da fe ffordd gorau i tynnu fwy o blant i fewn i'r ysgolion Gymraeg yw trwy dechrau gyda'r plant mewn gofal. So, unrhyw beth ni'n gallu wneud i roi fwy o cyfleusterau i croesawu plant bach i fewn, i cael gofal trwy'r gyfrwng y Gymraeg. Bydd hwnna yn mynd i helpu ni i gyd yn y tymor hir. Mae'r cyngor ym Mhen y Bont wedi derbyn bron 3 miliwn o bunnau oddi wrth y Llywodraeth Gymreig mewn grant cyfalaf i dilifro 4 canolfan trwy gyfrwng y iaith Cymraeg i bobl sy'n just yn ddechrau ar y daith. Bydd un yn mynd i helpu i cael fwy o blant i dod ymlaen am ysgol canol y cymoedd, ac mae gwaith yn mynd ymlaen hefyd yn y dre Pen y Bont, yn Porth Cawl, ac yn Betws hefyd, i wneud yn union beth oedd yw'r Davies yn awgrymu.
Cwestiwn 6, Sioned Williams.
Diolch, Llywydd. Will the First Minister make a statement on town centre redevelopment in South Wales West?
Thank the member for that question, Llywydd. Amongst the different sources of support for town centre redevelopment in South Wales West, the Transforming Towns Placemaking Grant Scheme, launched in April this year, will provide benefits for towns in the Bridgend, Neath Talbot and Swansea areas.
Diolch, Prif Weinidog. When speaking to retailers and market traders in Neath Town Centre, it's clear that the town centre is struggling at the moment in terms of tackling antisocial behaviour and a reduced footfall. The development of the swimming pool, cafe and library in the town will hopefully help bring in additional footfall, but there is a feeling that there's a need for more to be done to see a reduction in the empty retail units that we currently have in the town centre. And there is a need to tackle the antisocial behaviour, a need to tackle rent levels, business rates, and a need to expand the offer within the town. Will you therefore outline what further work you plan to undertake with Neath Talbot Council and other agencies on these issues during the Senedd term? Diolch.
Diolch yn fawr. Thank the member for that supplementary question. She's right to point to the work that is already underway. Major work, Llywydd, £13 million of investment in Neath Town Centre, 5.5 million of that provided by the Welsh Government, and as well as all the things that the member pointed to, the swimming pool, the health suite, the library, there will also be new good quality commercial and retail space to try and draw businesses back into that town centre, and to do so with the sort of imagination that we have seen in many parts of Wales, even during the crisis, where new businesses have opened on high streets. The future of retail cannot be an attempt to create things as they were in the past. The world has moved on and consumer behaviour has moved on, accelerated in many ways by the pandemic. But nevertheless, there are retail businesses that make a very particular offer that draw people to them and trade successfully, and can, and I'm sure will trade successfully in the centre of Neath as well, strengthening that commercial core. And beyond the current investment, we will of course go on talking with that local business community and with the local authority to see what other opportunities there will be, other funding streams that the Welsh Government will provide over the 5 years of this term further to strengthen the essential vitality of Neath Town Centre that will give it a future and a sense that it goes on being valued by its local citizens and it's a place they want to visit.
Cwestiwn 7, Rhiannon Passmore.
Diolch llawer. What action is the Welsh Government taking to utilise Islwyn's natural environment to benefit its people?
Llawer, yesterday marked the reopening of Cwm Forest Drive, one of the many environmental attractions in Islwyn, and I thank the member for her steadfast support of this and the wider environmental agenda in her constituency.
Thank you, First Minister. Yesterday, as you stated, the Cwm Forest Drive reopened for the first time since 2014 after undergoing a multi-million-pound investment. First Minister, there is a newly improved campsite, lake, several new all-ability trails with access for all, 3 new play areas, a woodland sculpture trail, a wooden cabin with panoramic, panoramic views of the communities of Islwyn, and that will act as a place for outdoor learning and a catalyst and hopefully a forest school in the future. First Minister, can I, on behalf of the people of Islwyn, thank you and the Welsh Labour Government who saw the potential of the natural, the stunning environment of the Gwent Valleys and prioritised Cwm Forest when initiating the Valleys Task Force project. And will you, First Minister, join me in thanking the Friends of Cwm Forest Drive, the Tumbalam Society, the Oxford House Industrial History Society in Risca, and the people in Islwyn who championed and fought over 7 long years with me for one of the crown jewels in Wales, natural environment, to be made accessible to all again. First Minister, how then can the Welsh Government ensure that the legacy of the Valleys Task Force is safeguarded and also protected and nurtured for future generations?
So I thank the member for that question. Yes, it was a great day with the reopening of the Forest Drive. I have hugely fond memories of it, of taking my children there when they were growing up, and I was lucky enough to be able to visit it again in March of this year, together with some families of people who had died during the coronavirus crisis, where trees were being planted in memory of loved ones. And it was a stunningly beautiful day. And just the sheer wealth of that natural environment is an amazing asset that we have. It's gone through a very tough time. So, as you know, 115,000 trees had to be felled along the drive because of sudden oak death syndrome, which affected the larch trees, in fact, in Cwm, and that's why it's taken all these 7 years for it to be reopened. But the point that Rhiannon Passmore makes is the important one, that over those long years, those local groups, those very committed people, the genuine commitment of the local authority to that site is what has led to its reopening, not just as it was before, but with all those additional facilities to which the local member referred, and I know will go on drawing many people now to the reopened site. And it is, as she said, part of that wider pattern of investment that we promised through the work of the Valleys Task Force. The money that we have invested in those destination venues. You can really make a journey across those valley communities now, from one of those destination sites to another, each one of them with new investment in it, each one of them saying something special about the history or the environment of that part of Wales. And I think many, many visitors will rediscover the richness of those communities, and Cwm will certainly be one of the jewels in that experience.
Ac yn ola, cwestiwn 8, Rhys Bowen.
Mawr Llywydd, Prif Weinidog, pa gamau mae Llywodraeth Cymru wedi gymryd i leihau llygrydd aer yng Nghaerdydd?
Diolch yn fawr. Llywydd, dan y drefn reoli ansawdd aer lleol a sefydlwyd drwy ddeddf ar amgylchedd, mae gan awdurdodau lleol ddyletswydd i asesu a reoli risgiau i iechyd y cyhoedd sy'n deillio o lygredd aer. Rydyn ni wedi edrych ar y cyngor annibynnol gan yr arbenigwyr ac wedi cytuno ar becyn o feserau a nodwyd gan Gyngor Gaerdydd i sicrhau ein bod yn cydymffurfio ar threfnau nitrogen dioxid.
Diolch yn fawr i chi, Prif Weinidog. Fel i chi'n ymwybodol, ar ddiwrnod a'r glân, nath Cyngor Llafur Caerdydd ailagor heol y castell yng nghanol Caerdydd. Nath eich gweinidog Prif Weinidog newid hinsawdd disgrifio'r symudiad fel siomedig, a mae nifer o gynghorwyr o Blaid Lafur yng Nghaerdydd wedi cwestiynu y ffigurau'r data mae'r cyngor wedi ddefnyddio. Nath ni gyd fan hyn, pob un aelod yn y Senedd, sefyll a manifesto i hyrwyddo deddf a'r glân, a bydde lefelau llygredd heol y castell yn anghyfreithlon o dan y ddeddf yna. Dwi'n gwybod bod yn anodd, mae yna gwynion yn Glanrafon, fel chi'n ymwybodol, yn Grangetown ac ym Moncana am gynnydd yn y lefel llygredd. Ond mae rhaid i ni symud pobl o ddefnyddio ceir, a dyw ailagor heol ddim yn ateb hynny. Felly, Prif Weinidog, gai eich annog chi, a newch chi plis siarad gyda Cyngor Caerdydd a'i annog nhw i ailystyried ac i gau heol y castell unwaith eto i gerbydau. Diolch yn fawr.
Wel, dwi ddim yn mynd i wneud hynny, Llywydd. Mae dewis mae'r Cyngor wedi wneud yw un anodd dros ben, ac y cynllun maen nhw'n bwrw ymlaen i'w wneud nawr yw yr unig cynllun oeddwn ni'n cytuno dan nhw yn reiddiol, ac o'r cynllun yn dangos oedd y ffigurau yn gallu dod nôl dan y lefel mae'r gyfraith yn rhoi lawr. Llywydd, I don't disagree with what Rhys Aboyne said about the need for finding ways in which people do not need to use their cars. But the closure of Castle Street did not simply lead to people leaving their cars at home. It led them to using their cars in other ways. And it led them to using their cars to travel instead through some of the poorest parts of our city, where the air quality is already not what it needs to be. So my constituents in Ninian Park Road, a heavily congested road, where routinely in summers children are told not to go out and play outside because the quality of the air is not good enough to do so, found that the closure of Castle Street made their plight a good deal more difficult. And the figures that the council have obtained, not from themselves but by independent analysts, shows that the closure of Castle Street had that detrimental effect on residential streets in a way that Castle Street is not a residential street. So the choice facing the council was a genuinely challenging one. They have decided to revert to the plan originally agreed with the Welsh Government, and which was funded by my colleague Leslie Griffiths at the time that she was responsible, to the tune of £19 million. It's not going back to 4 lanes of traffic in front of the castle, it's back to 2 lanes of traffic as we had agreed, with bus and bike lanes added. It will, for now, protect those people in those residential streets whose lives had been adversely impacted by the closure of Castle Street, and that's the balance that the council has struck. And I think, for me, until we are able to do longer-term things to reduce the use of cars altogether, it's a balance that is entirely defensible.
Diolch i'r Prif Weinidog. Yr eitem nesaf felly yw'r datganiad a chyhoeddiad busnes, a dwi'n galw'r trefnydd i wneud